Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Paresh Shah in Los Angeles, California. Paresh is a mechanical engineer, a Harvard MBA, entrepreneur, professor, and yogi. He's also the founder of Gearhead to Grouphead Leadership Academy, where he trains engineers and IT professionals to future-proof their career and transition from technologist to leader. Paresh, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's such an honor, Angela. I'm really glad to be here with you and your listeners. Hope you're doing great today.
Thanks. Well, as a technologist, what do you think is sort of the number one thing that kind of helps to ensure that we're successful during our entire career, like long term, not just right after we get out of college, but for the whole thing?
I would call it the human quotient. We've focused a lot over the past several decades on the IQ component, and then there's the evolution to EQ. And we're taking it to another level, which is really the human qualities and the skills. These are all learnable skills that we teach technologists, scientists, etc. So the number one way to future-proof your career, assuming you're competent at whatever technical endeavor you're engaged in, you have to be reasonably competent. Then at that point, one can invest in increased competence technically or increased competence in terms of some of what historically have been the soft skills. I'm going to call them the hard skills because they're harder to learn and they really make the biggest impact to future-proof your career, which are more of these human skills that allow you to become a greater contributor to your organization, elevate your own career and progression, and it actually extends into other aspects of your life by learning the skills that we teach to transform gearheads into what we call group heads.
You know, you make a really good point. It's interesting. I went to college also for engineering, computer engineering, and it was all math and science. I mean, I felt very, very fortunate at the time to be so focused in on just math, science, engineering, technology, but we didn't have any writing, any sort of speaking, communications, any of those courses. And so what you're talking about is really a piece, I know at least in my curriculum, that was really missing.
Yeah, and it's more and more important today, Angela, just given the proliferation of expectations, I would say, that people have around how one interacts with them, the proliferation of engaging content. So if you are an engineer, an IT pro, or a scientist, you need to be a great storyteller. You need to be an inspiring leader. You need to be an innovator because you're competing not just with other people, and it's not necessarily competing, but what's crowding out your voice if you're looking for more resources, if you've got an approach to your project that you feel would be most beneficial to the endeavor, or you simply want to get more resources. We're competing not with other people who might be able to do that better necessarily. We're competing with YouTube. We're competing with 3D IMAX experiences that people today are habituated to engage in. And if it's not interesting, we click and we move on. So people's synapses have been habituated and trained to basically, hey, engage me, move me, inspire me. Otherwise, I'm moving on. And so what's happened is humans now are needing to bring that to bear far more than before when we were younger, because if you're not engaging in a meeting, they're actually looking at YouTube videos underneath the conference table. And that's far more compelling. It's far more engaging. It's far more innovative. And so what we're doing is we're upskilling people's human abilities so that we can get across whatever we need to get across, whether it's technical, business, human, professional, career professional growth that we're seeking. So yeah, it's even more important today because people are spoiled. We have limited attention span, and there's a certain expectation of how you show up um, in terms of your level of leadership and inspiring, engaging uh, communications.
You're right. You're right. It's interesting you mentioned someone's watching YouTube underneath the conference table because it's no longer enough to be right, to have the right answer, to have the technology solution. You do have to present it in a way that people will actually listen to you.
Absolutely. And even the being right, Angela, and it's interesting you point that out. When we were engineers, and once a geek, always a geek. I'm proud to continue to be a geek or a gearhead, because once one has that training of being a problem solver and being analytical in one's approach, that applies irrespective of whether you then end up doing additional things like being creative as you are, being a host on a show or being a business coach. Um, and so this being right is also a really great insertion point for some of the areas that we find that gearheads struggle with because we're trained to be right. We're trained, one of the 7 great gearhead strengths that we've identified in our research over the past 20 years, which are the 7 strengths typically gearheads have, which help them succeed, is what we call critical thinking. Like, we're great critical thinkers. We can defend our position and say, well, you know what, I believe we should use this composite material for that aircraft. I used to work at Westinghouse / Northrop Grumman. And so you'd present a case to say, well, the factor of safety would be this, and vibrational shock will be prevented, and there's thermal stresses, et cetera. So we advocate. We've been trained to advocate in a very critical way to be right. And in today's world, while that's valuable, there's additional skills we must have in order to really listen to other people's perspectives, integrate them, and get a higher level of understanding of what's actually happening in that context in order to come to a solution that works for everyone. And so being right, or being a critical thinker, which is one of the key skills, often leads to what we call the 7 deadly career deadly blind spots. So in our model of the Gearhead to Grouphead Leadership Academy, our transformation from a gearhead to grouphead is comprised around what we call a 7-7-7 jackpot your career model, or future-proof your career. Because what we found, my co-founders and I, my co-founder is a PhD neuroscientist who, has seen the same phenomenon in the scientific community as you and I have seen in the IT and engineering world. What we found is there are 7 typical great gearhead strengths, we call them great gearhead strengths, that we should be proud of. And those are problem solving, being detail oriented, being analytical, inventive, independent workers, action oriented, and critical thinkers. So those are the 7, what we call the great gearhead strengths. That's what makes us great as technical talent or as geeks or nerds. However, often, as is the case from a lot of the psychological research we've done, is our strengths often end up manifesting as blind spots, often subconscious blind spots, which actually become issues and career limiters, or actually career fatal for us. And so we've identified 7 career deadly blind spots that often keep people from moving up in their career, getting paid more, being respected more, being more innovative, and being able to relate to those around them. So the 7 career deadly blind spots, if you'd like, I can just quickly run through them.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
The 7 career deadly blind spots that are really a problem, and we're seeing this time and time again from people, as you said, who really have focused on the math, the science, the programming, and the more analytical, kind of left brain strength. The 7 career deadly blind spots are following, and I'd love to get your response as I say to these. Gearheads tend to be micromanagers when they get elevated into higher supervisory positions. That
That
often comes
makes
from
sense.
their and it comes from their ability to work independently, and being right and being critical thinkers is like, well, this is how you do it. So the 7 career deadly blind spots are micromanagement, poor communications, Lack of customer centricity. Often we're not connected to ultimately what the customer wants. Missing the business and human trade-off. Often we get so enamored with the technological solution that we actually miss the other two dimensions, which is there's business issues here and there are also human issues with our team, with our customers, etc. So missing the human business trade-offs is the fourth one. Weak conflict management is the fifth one. Limited creativity is the sixth career deadly blind spot. And uninspiring leadership is the seventh. So I'll run through them again. Micromanagement, poor communications, lack of customer centricity, missing the business and human trade-offs, weak conflict management, limited creativity, and uninspiring leadership. So that's what stalls people's careers, ends it, and they see other people rising faster and being more innovative and being more entrepreneurial because of these blind spots, which we can address through what we call the 7 essential Grouphead upgrades. It's like a software upgrade. And so I can go through those 7 upgrades with you, and then we can go from there. How's that work?
Sure. That sounds good.
Okay, so the 7 essential Grouphead upgrades are as follows. 1, we call lifter leadership, and we can talk about that. It's a leadership that's based on positivity, purpose, servant leadership, creativity, and authenticity. The second one is productive dialogue upgrade. How do we be productive in our dialogue? The third one is what we call non-obvious innovation. How do we be innovators? How do we think in non-obvious ways to solve problems, whether they be technical problems, business problems, human problems? So non-obvious innovation is the third essential Grouphead upgrade. The fourth one is what we call strategic agility. And that's the ability to step up and see what's going on from a bigger vantage, being a strategic leader rather than being very focused on a particular task only. The fifth essential upgrade we call macro management, which is the opposite of micro management. The sixth one is storytelling to inspire. And we just talked about that. We need to be storytellers, all of us. Just to get a resource or just to get budget, we must tell stories that are compelling, engaging, and create a call to action, just like a YouTube video or something else is compelling. And then the seventh essential Grouphead upgrade we call managing the human wild cards, because humans are wild cards. They're not predictable like software or systems or computers or cantilever beams if we're talking about engineering. And so that's the seventh essential Grouphead upgrade.
Well, you make a lot of really good points in all of the different things that you listed. I think the one that really resonated for me was the conflict management piece, because I have certainly seen leaders coming from a technology engineering background that, eventually have to go up against other departments in different sorts of negotiation within the business.
Mm-hmm.
And they just aren't prepared to be able to have those negotiations in the same way. And I've seen a lot of frustration come away when the person with the engineering background says, I don't understand what happened. Why must we have this political argument?
The solution is so simple. It's laid out in black and white. Yeah, exactly. They get very focused on a limited perspective.
So I'm curious, you started your own career at engineering before transitioning into more of a leadership role, I'm sure through kind of your MBA and some of your other work. What inspired you to transition from more of, a gearhead to more of a group leader?
For me, when I was working in the aerospace industry with what's now Northrop Grumman, I was working in some really great, cool projects that were, classified defense projects that were oriented around radar systems, avionics, and things like that. And I guess you used the word inspire. I would say more frustrated is what moved me. So we were building radar systems for the F-16 fighter, as well as for the AWACS communication system. And so my job was to create the board that the chips went on and make sure that the chips had the proper heat sink so that they wouldn't get too hot, make sure that they were uh, robust to the vibrations of, G forces and airplanes and stuff. So I was focusing on the chip that goes on the computer card that goes in a module, that goes in a box, that goes in a radar system, that goes in an F-16, which goes and flies a mission. And where I was asking questions like, well, why are we fighting in the first place? So I'm going way, way up there. And they're like, Paresh, just do the module. And so I wanted an elevated person. Like, why am I doing this? What is the point here? And I kept moving to higher levels. Like, I wanted to understand the systems engineering of, hey, how does this, module fit into the radar system? And is there a way to, kind of make the module and the box the same thing rather than two separate things so that there's less weight, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it was less inspiring in that sense, Angela, and more I felt frustrated and I wanted to get a bigger picture. And I literally was asking the question, why are we fighting? Why is there war? And so I wanted to get an elevated perspective. Now, from the inspiring perspective, actually, it just sparked through to me as you asked. There was an inspiration. The first business book I read while I was an engineer was a long time ago, and it was called In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters. Are you familiar with that book?
Well, tell me a little bit about it.
Basically, it was a while back, and we can argue whether he was right or not. But Tom Peters was a partner at McKinsey and Company, and he wrote. It was really a watershed book where he went around and said, where are the excellent companies, and what is it about excellent companies that makes them great? And it was really compelling to understand, like, business as a geek, to go, well, where is the excellence? And for instance, one of the stories that really inspired me was it was such a while back. I think it was the grocery store Piggly Wiggly. He was outlining them because they were such loyal customers and such great experiences and huge profitability, and their workers loved working where they worked. And it was really an excellent company that Tom Peters and Robert Waterman highlighted. And the story that really sort of clicked with me, that kind of shook me up a little in a way, Angela, was they were highlighting this great CEO who really was an inspiring CEO, kind of like Sam Walton used to be, Sam Walton in the early days of Walmart. And they talk about him coming out of his office at the end of the day when they were his team had just completed shooting a photo shoot for their Christmas catalog for some of their utensils and cutlery and various ornamented Christmas kitchenware. And so he came out of the office, as I recall this, and people were sort of winding up, and the cameramen were, winding up their cords and ending up the day. And he's like, hey, how are you all doing? And they're like, oh, sir, we're doing great. We just had this great photo shoot. He's like, oh, that's super. We're looking forward to the Christmas catalog, and really appreciate you guys working so hard. And so what he did was they had photographed a cake or a piece of cake on one of the items that was for sale in their catalog, like a cake holder or some plates and such. And he's like, that's great. You guys do a great job. And as he left, he took a fork and he ate the cake. He took a piece of the cake because they were done with the shooting or whatever. And he was like, guys, this cake doesn't taste good. We need to reshoot this thing. And that blew me away, Angela. It blew me away. It's like, wait a minute. The cake doesn't taste good, so we need to reshoot the picture? And then it goes on to go, well, of course, because excellence runs through and through. And if you're representing a cake that doesn't taste good as what your company is about, then it was unacceptable to this leader. And so that blew me away. And so I became very curious about business in general, and business then became like the ultimate sport for me to follow and learn about. And so I then applied to various MBA programs and was fortunate enough to attend Harvard Business School. And that was an eye opener because I was just a geek, amongst, bankers and McKinsey folks and, folks from marketing, from Procter and Gamble, like, the gods of business. And there I was, little geeky Paresh, but really passionate about this new domain and this new subject, which elevated it, right? That cake conversation was kind of like, why are we fighting in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what I hear is that you didn't necessarily fit into the engineering box completely. And I think if we find ourselves in that situation, sometimes it's really important to listen because you end up finding a path that's a much better fit for you long term.
Yes.
I'm curious. So you mentioned you worked on the AWACS. Is
Yeah.
that plane? Do they work on that out of Oklahoma City, or am I?
Oh, you know what? I'm trying to think where the base is. We used to go up to, I think it's at the 552nd Air Control at the Tinker Air Force Base, but I'm not sure
That's right.
anymore. I don't know. It's been a while. Uh,
Yeah, that's interesting.
uh,
I grew up near there. That's why
oh yeah, yeah. And back then this was a secret project. It was
Mhm.
so cool because we actually built the radar. It was the first. Like, talk about a crazy idea. Someone said, "Hey, instead of having like these little radars, why don't we take an air traffic control radar that can scan something like 80,000 cubic miles of airspace, the ones that are on the ground at airports, and why don't we stick it on top of an airplane, and then have the eye in the sky that can be the command and control around, hey, the tanks need to move here, we need the air support to come in here, we've got the ships doing their part." And again, that was a real, it was super innovative. And I run an innovation company along with this leadership work that we do. And, that to me was really the company is called the non-obvious company. That was non-obvious to go, hey, why don't we take something huge and stick it on an airplane? And basically create command in the sky, and that had huge benefits for our military forces in the ability to really get a 360 view of a battlefield.
You're right. It was very innovative. Well, so if we're listening today, and let's say we currently work in engineering, but this conversation is resonating with us, we're thinking, gosh, I don't fit into the box either. And I'm ready to move into leadership.
Hmm.
Where should we start? Like, where do you recommend we begin?
Okay. Uh, I'd like to rephrase the question. It's not that we don't fit in the box. There's just more to us. Is how?
Right, right, right. I
Yeah.
mean, no, when I say you don't fit into the box, you're looking beyond the box.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. At the mission. So if we're listening to this, saying, you know what, I'm resonating with some of this. I want some of these other aspects. Um, where I would look internally is one of the things we train people in as part of the one of the essential upgrades we call lifter leadership, and lifter leadership uh, basically is around a whole new way of managing for today's times that's actually quite distinct from even a few years ago. And I'll just give you a little anecdote that will give you a contrast into the methodology. So, for instance, Angela, when I was at business school, and probably likewise with you, I learned to be very effective at hunting for customers, targeting you, capturing my share, segmenting you, analyzing you so I could have my share and the competition couldn't have any. That was the mindset. That's what we were trained to do: segment, capture, target, pursue. Um, and that reflects a mindset that is outdated now and is moving out very quickly with the new generations and their values. And so lifter leaders, which anyone can be a lifter leader, are people who elevate their coworkers, their customers, their community, and therefore their companies. Lifters, realize that we don't need to hunt, target, capture, transact. No, lifters attract customers, we inspire, we serve, and ultimately we lift. And that has a whole different energetic feel. You can probably feel it right now. It's a whole different thing.
Mhm, mhm.
And so we have 4 mind shifts, almost like the 7 habits from Stephen Covey from years ago. We have 4 mind shifts that lifter leaders learn as part of our curriculum. And so the first mind shift, I've just given you a little glimpse of it, we call the hunt is over. It's no longer that aggressive predator, prey, capture, bag the customer. That is an old militaristic model of management that does not work for today's times, for today's workers. The millennials and the Ys and Zs get a lot of criticism for the way that they show up or don't show up, as being lazy, entitled, yada yada yada. The fact is, we're leading them with an outdated model, and that's why we're not getting the magic from them. If we lead them with lifter leadership, or our own engineers and people who become leaders embody these things, you're going to have people walk on fire for you because they're so passionate and purposeful about what you're doing. So one of the other mind shifts, in addition to the hunt is over, which is an answer to your question of, what do we do as we feel this sort of, I want there to be more around the box. The third lifter mind shift, we say, tap into your yes and qualities, your yes and. It used to be, Angela, when I was young, it's like, okay, what do you want to be? Are you analytical? Then you can be an engineer or an investment banker. Are you good with people? Then you go into sales. Are you creative? Then you can go into this other aspect. And we had to check off a box of, what am I? Am I analytical? Am I creative? Am I a salesperson? Am I an operations person? And you really couldn't dance between those boxes. In today's world, the great companies, the excellent companies, and the great leaders understand that it's all about tapping into your own and your team's yes and qualities. Lifters say, yes, I am good at being analytical, as Angela is. And I'm great at creating compelling audio content. And I can coach executives. And you might make a great minestrone soup as a chef. And the whole idea is bringing your yes and qualities together in a way that's uniquely differentiated for you. It's a great way to future-proof your career, because more and more companies are understanding that we need people with these yes and qualities where they have depth in a couple of areas. Technical depth would be one in your case and in the case of many of your listeners. But also, what else is your passion that you've not allowed to manifest or be expressed within your job setting? And that's where there's amazing power, because I'm sure every one of your listeners has a yes and quality to them in addition to their technical or scientific competence. And if you can bring that to bear in your job, in your relationships, it's really, really powerful. So that's what I would answer as your question of, like, if you're feeling unsettled, what are your yes and qualities that you can really flourish with and bring, perhaps in a small way, perhaps in a big way, as a contribution to your company. Mm-hmm. So for instance, when I was a kid, I was very much into music. I play electric guitar, hard rock. I was in drama. I met my wife in a play in high school. I was into sports and all kinds of things. And then as it came towards choosing college and a career, etc., I pretty much had like 3 choices: be an engineer, because I'm Indian, be an engineer, be a doctor, or be a disappointment to your parents. So I narrowed very quickly into that engineering realm, and that's where I kind of thrived, and then expanded into the business realm. However, a lot of my artistic and creative aspects basically got shoved aside as, that's for other parts of who I am, but that doesn't show up in my career. However, now my career is I'm a keynote speaker, e.g. drama and performance. I'm a coach to CEOs. I'm an innovation with strategy, leadership, and business person. So that's where that creative side comes in. And clients love it. That's what they pay me for. That's what we pay our team for, is that yes and. How do we bring strategy and leadership and creativity and teamwork together in a way that can inspire great ideas that come to market. So what I would encourage you all to think about is, what are your yes and qualities where you've got depth and passion that you can bring to bear, especially in today's world where things are not as discrete functionally either. Like, who would have thought that the great companies would figure out that you take technologists and math and mash that up with marketing? Who would have thought that marketing and math, e.g., web analytics, social marketing, would come together?
Mm-hmm.
But if you had a yes and of, oh, I love marketing, I've got a feel for, and I'm great with math, and I'm great with systems, I mean, you've got an incredible, group head competence to bring people together around projects that, if you're strictly within any one narrow field, marketing, technology, math, analytical, finance, you can't contribute or tie these things together.
You're right. You bring up some interesting points. I mean, for me, I actually transitioned out of engineering and into digital marketing because I loved marketing and I was able to leverage my analytical background.
There you go.
But, as we're talking about, moving into a leadership role, very often it means to be a manager or maybe a director or a vice president over an engineering team, just for example.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes what we're really looking for or we're considering is to move into something totally different. It could be marketing, it could be something related to customer service. I mean, just something completely different than technology. And I don't mean digital marketing, I mean something that's like completely disconnected. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel about those types of transitions for someone that's coming from a technology background?
Um, I've seen many people do them. I've done it largely. I mean, I'm still a technologist. I build technology companies, and a lot of my clients are technology companies. So I'm facile and versatile with speaking and with some of these things. However, um, how I feel about it is, there's an instinct, Angela, for us to abandon what we love and what we're great at for maybe something else. And I would encourage people to go, how can I yes and the other thing? The other thing that if I'm an engineer and I love the culinary arts and I want to be a chef, how might I yes and that? Unless you can't stand being a technologist and don't feel you're wired for that, um, I would encourage people not to abandon their great strengths, which are really valuable. And many people do not have these strengths that we talked about, being problem solvers, detail oriented, analytical, inventive, independent workers, action oriented, critical thinkers. So those are great strengths. Um, However, if one does, want to sort of, try something entirely different, then take one of your yes ands that you really feel passionate about, that dream about, that you might have done as a side hustle, or maybe you're in a band at night, or maybe you love cooking, or maybe you love marketing, and just really go deep, go deep, go deep, and you know, always keep looking for how you can connect that back to other gifts and qualities that you have, because that's what will make you a differentiated contributor. Because if you're an engineer or an IT pro or a scientist, you go, oh, I'm done with this, I want to be a marketer, you're competing against marketers who are also great at branding, they're also great at storytelling, they're also maybe great at analytics. And so what else are you going to bring to that new frontier?
Hmm. You're right. You need something that's going to help you stand out for sure.
To future-proof. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
because in the technology realm, and this is part of why people are really excited about this Gearhead to Grouphead training, is uh, it opens up people's eyes. Do you know how many new STEM graduates are created every year, Angela? Um, Science, technology, engineering, and math graduates in the world per year. Just
Oh,
guess.
it's huge. It's huge.
It's more than the number of Uber cars in the world. It's more than the number of visitors to the Eiffel Tower per year. It's more than the number of employees McDonald's has worldwide.
Wow.
8.3 million new science, technology, engineering, and math graduates are created every year. So
Mhm.
there's an imperative if we want to future-proof your career and continue to move up and excel. There's an imperative to learn these group head skills because these youngsters, they're hungry, they're super smart. They can learn things faster than us. They're wired for that. And so, strictly relying on your technical competence to have your career continue to perform for you is a very risky thing. It's very risky. However, if you master some of the upgrades around, communication, as you talked about, around, managing the human wild cards, being an innovator, then the sky is the limit, and you might naturally then evolve into someone who doesn't do as much technical work. However, you can oversee technical people as part of a broader constitution of people. You may have marketing, finance, etc., sales. So, uh, you know, that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Well, so I talk with job seekers all the time who are looking for many different types of jobs, but of course, careers in technology fields like engineering or computer programming, they're really popular. And
Mhm.
I hear a lot of talk right now about location because, in the past, it seemed like remote work was really going to become a thing and that location wasn't going to be so important. But, in the last year, we started to see companies kind of clustering a little bit. And I think the Amazon headquarters that, was kind of when they went through their selection process,
Their beauty contest.
it showed us that location might still be important. I mean, from what you're saying, how important do you feel like location is in a technology career?
Location or geographic proximity with your coworkers.
Location, because I'll be honest, like I've seen people who are in places like Memphis who have um, great skills. It could be digital marketing or engineering, but there aren't maybe jobs in a smaller market for those particular skills. And I'm
Uh-huh.
starting to see the jobs clustering in certain large markets.
hmm
But I'm just curious of maybe another perspective.
I'm going to be a little contrarian here. I don't think location is essential. Um, I believe that having a community or a platform or a place where you can practice these skills um, towards advancement uh, is the key. And so many companies are supporting remote workers. Clearly, as an entrepreneur in Memphis or wherever you are, you can thrive. However, your customers will likely be global, and,
Mhm.
and you can support. I support global customers. Often, using Skype, Zoom. You and I are in a Zoom session right now. So let's take it in. Let's take two branches down this inquiry. One branch is if I'm a job seeker, do I need to go to the location where the jobs are? Would be one question. The other question is, can I create a successful career, whether as an entrepreneur or as a remote worker for another company in a non-major market? So the first one, if it's about location, clearly there's more fish in the barrel in some of the major markets. I would suggest, though, to your readers, to your listeners, from the work we've been doing with some of the major technology companies and training their people, is um, don't go to the major markets. Go to like the next ones, the next ones. So for instance, you've got Silicon Valley, which has its own dynamic, but then you've got things like Silicon Beach here in Santa Monica, which is really flourishing. You've got places like Austin, Texas, which are just there's these hotbeds that are being created, and that there's this energy there. There's not, there's new people there who are all sort of like, hey, I moved here. There's excitement happening, rather than the established way of being, which continues to if you, and I'm not dissing Seattle, Silicon Valley, New York. I mean, these are great places, and so many of my clients are there. But if I was a job seeker, and assuming that I have some time, I'm not desperate or anything, and I really want to find something where I can flourish and thrive, I would go to like those next cities, because there's some amazing next cities that are coming on strong, that have an ecosystem of support, meetup groups, and there's an energy and a passion and a purpose behind those cities. That, hey, you know what? People thought we were just about great ribs and whatever, but we really are technology experts as well. So I would suggest that on that first branch, which is location, if it's important, and it is if you want to have a broad pool, and also just in terms of the efficiency of meeting with people. So if you're doing job searches in the way that you discuss with many of your other guests, I was listening to one of your talks with the head of LinkedIn's systems there and recruiting, and a lot of it is, let's meet people, let's check in with friends, let's do informational interviews, and being able to get to places from a location perspective, and be able to have several meetings in a week without having to fly back and forth, certainly has its own benefits.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot to be said for sort of those smaller markets and really keeping your options open. So I'm curious from your perspective, you know, I know you mentioned the young people that are coming out with STEM degrees every year and how they're smart and they're excited.
Yeah.
I've noticed as you get further away from your degree, especially a technology degree, sometimes companies put a little less stock in it. Maybe the technology has changed some and they kind of assume that you're probably out of date by now. I mean, if
Hmm.
we're starting to sort of experience this, if we feel like employers are not taking us as seriously as a technologist, what can we do to kind of remedy that situation?
So, just to clarify, Angela, you feel that companies are not taking people's technology degrees as seriously these days, or after you've worked a few years, it's less of an issue for them?
After you've worked for some time, let's say it's been 10 years or so, like I can give for my example,
Hmm.
I graduated with an undergrad in computer and systems engineering from a top school.
Hmm.
And when I first came out, all the doors would open.
Hmm.
But I think now, the framework around which development happens has changed. A lot of things have changed in technology. And so I think the strength of that degree that may be over 10 years old in a technology field,
Hmm.
it's the value kind of lowers a little bit. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering from your perspective, what can we do to not lose the value?
Combine it with a yes and demonstrate that you've applied that in the subsequent years of work that you have done in a way that has created results and performance, and outcomes. So, um, again, I agree that I'd say that even today the degrees are less important fresh out of school than they used to be. Just given
Mm,
the proliferation of gifts people have, and how you've got 12-year. I've got a young man that I talked about in one of my keynotes around this Gearhead to Grouphead work. It's a 12-year-old kid. He built his first app when he was 8. He is working with IBM on their AI work. He teaches. He has his own web channel where he teaches in a very compelling way programming to people all over the world. He's a cartoonist, so he's doing little caricatures and stuff. His name is Bakshi, and you go, whoa, there's these multi-talented people out there. So I think the degree itself, unless you're from, one of those super, rocket schools, um, the degree is important. However, it's that yes and perhaps in a part-time job that you had. It's like, hey, you know what? I have this degree. And in my part-time work, I was, a salesperson at a shoe store. I'm interested in talking to that person because versus someone who may have had a couple of decimal points higher GPA in their engineering or their science degree, because that person understands humans, they understand interaction, they understand sales, um, or at least they've been in that soup.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that degrees are less valued today than before, even right out of school, unless you're at one of those super top schools, because someone with just a couple of years out of work, even 2 years of work, 3 years of work from a unknown school can blow you away as a recruiter relative to someone fresh out of school from a fairly decent school because of those other things that they have created. I've got a young man who worked for me. He came out of college with a biomedical engineering degree from a really great school. And I wouldn't say it was one of the top 10, but probably in the top 30, 40 schools. And he had a job at a major company in engineering. And he had a couple of classes left in order to graduate. You know how sometimes like they let you graduate and then you got to just come back later and finish up a couple of courses to
Sure.
officially get your degree. So I had him work for one of my companies. I hired him to work for me and doing basically helping build some apps. He was the project manager. He worked with all the developers in terms of, the sprints and the wireframes and the user experience and, all these other aspects. And he had never done it before, but he had that analytical, way of thinking and that skill. And so I lured him to turn down or actually not start a job with a major company in biomedical engineering. He came to work with me, moved to LA, and he did so great. He was amazing. And he never finished his degree. He's like, you know what? I don't need to finish my degree. Doesn't matter. And he now, we're talking 3 years, maybe 4 years max from when he graduated, is being wooed by, we're talking major companies, like household names, to run all of their apps across the world and basically be like the head of all of their apps and user experience. So he doesn't even have a degree technically.
Well, that's really inspiring. It's good to kind of think of it from that perspective. Paresh, this has been really great. If we have heard the podcast today and we'd like to follow up and learn more about your work, where should we go?
I would invite any of your listeners to come to our website. We've got some resources for your folks, Angela. If you come to our main website, which is www.imalifter.com. Again, lifter leaderships. Lifters are people who are positive, purposeful, and the new generation of leaders every company is seeking, because lifters are the most innovative, they're the most engaging and engageable leaders. They build trust and loyalty with customers, and they understand how to lead with purpose. So if you go to imalifter.com/Copeland coaching, we have a variety of resources there, and you'll be able to access a preview of our Gearhead to Grouphead Academy. We'll make sure there's a preview for your folks there to get a taste of it. There's a diagnostic there that's free. You can take it and see where you feel you turn out. You end up on the scale of being a gearhead to a group head, and which of these great strengths do you have? These great gearhead strengths. To what extent? To what extent do you suffer from these career deadly blind spots, which we're finding many people do because they think it's all about technology, all about their technology competence and learning the next language. And then we also have some additional resources. We have some clips for some keynotes I've given, etc. So I would recommend and welcome any of your folks to come to iamalifter.com/Copeland coaching and check out the Gearhead to Grouphead Leadership Academy. We do live workshops for corporations in teaching their folks these essential upgrades, the 777 transformation model. And we have an online curriculum that we're delivering to people all over the world because certain people, if you're an entrepreneur, we just can't get to everyone. So I welcome you all to come and give us feedback, see what you think. But we really are excited about how the world is changing and that there's people like you, Angela, who are helping people understand that there's more to the technology competence in being a job seeker. And it's bringing these yes and qualities and some of these other lifter mind shifts like the hunt is over. Truly, if you tune in well and are aligned, then in the truest sense, Angela, the job will come to you. That's when I talk about the hunt.
Right.
That's what we mean. The hunt is over.
Yep.
Lifters don't need to do it the old way, which we did. Hustle, make 20 calls a day and blast your resume out and, wear yourself thin, particularly if you don't have a job. It's very stressful if you have a family and stuff.
Yep, you're right.
If you align as a lifter, it will come to you in a magical way sometimes where you'll meet someone, literally surfing at the beach, like that perfect contact, that perfect relationship will show up at a club or at the grocery store because that's how this lifter leadership works. It's a very powerful construct that's aligned with the way things work in today's society. It's aligned with quantum physics. We're all energy fields, and what we put out, we basically attract. And so we teach people, how do you tap into that? Because it's a lot easier that way.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Paresh, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed the show today, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more subscribers we have, the easier it is for people to find the show.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.